Yes, here are our
There we are.
welcome and introductions. It's always funny. So you've already heard a little bit about ourselves. So here we are. Here's our faces again. Um, and we will, I think, just probably jump right into the conversation. I'm just going to double check that I am recording this session. I think, yep, there we go. So we are good to go.
So, at the Community Engaged Scholarship Institute, you can tell by our title and about what we said already, we are committed to community engaged scholarly practices, and we'll be reviewing some of those key terms. And in the context of the Skills for Research Impact series, we're particularly highlighting and paying attention to the ways in which engagement can enable the impact of research knowledge that we create together. So we're really interested and we're constantly learning in the connection between engagement practices and research mobilization and knowledge impact. So we're going to cover four basic steps in our presentation. First, we're going to review those key terms, as I've mentioned. We're going to lead some discussion on how to identify potential collaborators for your projects, key steps for community engagement practices, and then some tips and considerations to ensure that your engagements are effective and impactful on all parts.
Great, thanks, Liz. So to begin, some of you may have attended previous Skills for Research Impact series workshops. Some of you may not have. So we thought it might just be useful to ground ourselves in some of the key terms that we'll be using today. Some may be familiar, others may not be. So, first, we wanted to give a brief description or a reminder for those of you who are familiar already about what knowledge mobilization is. So, as defined by the Social Science and Humanities Research Council, knowledge mobilization is the flow of information and knowledge among multiple individuals and groups, leading to intellectual, social, and economic benefit. So, really, the key point I want to highlight here is that knowledge mobilization is a flow, not just a pushing out of information or a downloading of academic research findings onto community, but it really is a multi-way exchange of knowledge and expertise among collaborators who can use it to inform their own decision making and action. Knowledge mobilization is also about getting the right knowledge to the right people at the right time in the right way so that it can be used and hopefully used to create positive impact. So it's about paying attention to the processes by which knowledge is shared in order to maximize the likelihood that it will be understood and used. So, in short, it's an intentional process by which research can create impact. So, in terms of the actual terminology, you may have also heard terms like knowledge transfer or knowledge exchange. They have overlapping and different meanings. They may come from different disciplines or areas of practices, or even geographic regions. So you may find that you have to clarify what you mean and check in with your collaborators about which terms they're comfortable with, familiar with, and would prefer to kind of work under. Um, at SESI, we often use the term integrated knowledge mobilization to emphasize the importance of building intentional relationships and community engagement processes that occur throughout the research process. Not just disseminating research findings at the end of that research. So we are really centering community priorities and expertise from the very beginning of conceptualizing a project or of a partnership. And our hope with doing that is to increase the relevance, and the usefulness of the research project process, and essentially, eventually, um, increasing the usefulness of those findings for all of the collaborators who are involved. So, to us, effective knowledge mobilization is about bridging the gap between knowledge producers and knowledge users, between research researchers and practitioners, between campus and community, with the end goal of making that research useful to society. So, as I said before, it really goes beyond that simple dissemination of knowledge and it supports that engagement throughout the research process. So we have a diagram here. We hope that it illustrates what we mean a little bit. So we see kind of the bringing together of community audiences and campus as knowledge producers and knowledge users. And I'll talk about those terms a little bit more on the next slide. But we see those groups coming together and kind of in that collaborative space, we see the potential for more impact. So knowledge mobilization, it really requires this real tangible bringing together of people to enable mutual learning, um, exchange, and co-creation of knowledge. So it works to develop a culture of partnership between academic researchers and practitioners where the desired outcome is to create knowledge that is more relevant and applicable. So, by bridging the gap between what are maybe traditionally known as or called knowledge users and knowledge producers, um, knowledge mobilization increases knowledge use and accelerates research impact. I kind of alluded to this before. We don't love the terms knowledge users and knowledge producers because knowledge is created and used everywhere. It's not really actually a binary. So, we might instead describe these groups as maybe we have people sharing knowledge presently and people presently acting on that knowledge. But there's a lot more interplay between those two groups than maybe even that previous diagram really showed. Um, that's a bit of an aside, but I'll continue on around this particular slide where I just wanted to add that research has identified that interaction between researchers and practitioners, or these two knowledge groups, this is that critical factor in knowledge uptake. So in 2014, Catherine Oliver and colleagues reported that the biggest enabler of the use of evidence by policymakers was the existence of relationships with researchers and having that opportunity for policymakers to collaborate directly with researchers. So really, there is tangible evidence that effectively engaging and working with your partners, with your academic partners, your non-academic partners, is really one of the most important things that you can do to be successful in mobilizing research knowledge. Um, but how do we do that? So, um, back to that definition of terms, we thought it might be helpful for us to define community engagement as we think of it, or as we work at SESI, which is a collaboration between institutions of higher education and their larger communities. These could be local, regional, national, global. And so that collaboration is for the mutually beneficial exchange of knowledge and resources in a context of partnership and reciprocity. So we've defined community engagement, but I am curious to hear from the group today, who is community? Who might represent community? So this is maybe a great opportunity for folks to write in the chat. Who do you consider to be community and who could you see as potential collaborators on a project?
Kendra, I can share
Mhm.
with you what comes up in the chat just in case your
Oh, great.
screen.
Okay,
Oh,
that's perfect. I do have it up here, but you
okay.
never know when things might disappear. I'm assuming everyone is thinking very hard about this.
So the question really is, in your own research contexts or personal practices, professional practices, who might be the community or communities that you would want to have as a potential collaborator? Who would you like to exchange knowledge with, and for whom might you want to create impact together? So we have a comment from Carly saying farmers would be a crucial community for their work. Awesome. Don't be shy. Oh, here we go. Anyone who has an interest in a particular initiative, right? And depending on the initiative, the communities who matter or who benefits from it. Yeah. And depending on the work that you're doing and the subjects and context, of course, that could be a diverse group of people. Well, since it's quiet, I'm going to add that for me at SESI, it would be community service workers.
Mhm.
That's a lot of the people we partner with.
There's a couple of other oh, now they're coming in. People just needed
They needed
like
to
I said,
start.
everyone was just thinking. So we become international students. Okay, yep, certainly. Another dairy producers, government policymakers, yes. Um, Liz, your comments, community service workers, thank you. Jess has said nonprofit groups. Uh, Jack has added government, community food workers, students and learners, the future of food. Great. Yes. Amazing. Thank you, everyone. So I have listed a few examples here. This is certainly not an exhaustive list, and some of these groups there's overlap. So some of the examples I've provided, so nonprofits, government and policymakers, international development agencies, philanthropists, granting bodies, community associations, community members, activists, artists, people with lived experience, industry and businesses. So, really, the key takeaway that I'm hoping folks gain from this exercise is really that community can be defined really in countless different ways. And it can include any of the groups that are listed here that were listed in the chat. And basically any groups that you can even conceive of, and probably ones that you hadn't yet conceived of.
Yeah, awesome. And there's no one community, right? And all communities are variously defined and circumscribed. They overlap with one another. We have communities of identity, we have communities of practice, we have communities of affiliation, we have communities of, geographically located ones. And then as you have pointed out in your own answers in the chat, there's all sorts of other ways to kind of identify and define the communities with whom you'd like to partner. So that's really helpful. So now we're going to shift gears, and I'm going to take a turn sharing some thoughts with you all. So we want to now lead you through sort of an example or a discussion of the ways in which you might go about identifying your collaborators. And again, we're taking an engaged approach. All of this can be mapped onto knowledge mobilization at any phase of the project. So don't feel that you have to be doing community engaged research in order to use these principles in your knowledge mobilization efforts. That's just where we come from. Do you mind shifting slides, Kendra? I'm now officially, oh, you already did. I'm now officially flying without being able to see what you're doing. Okay. So, of course, the first step in any meaningful community engagement or knowledge mobilization is to identify your potential collaborators. So, my biggest piece of advice would be do your homework and prepare in advance of reaching out. And there's nothing wrong with starting from what you do know. So start from relationship and connection. So what and who do you know? And then move to who do you not know that also needs to be part of it. So think about your research topic, your potential research questions and focus, which of course in an engaged model are also to be collaboratively decided upon. So in a community engaged scholarship approach, our research priorities and questions are actually driven by community priorities. So we shape the research from start to finish according to community issues, priorities, learning needs, and so on. Um, but even if your academic focus is determined by you, there are still really, really profoundly beneficial ways to uh, kind of incorporate the perspectives and knowledges of policymakers, practitioners, other community and members into shaping the work so that when it comes time to mobilize your results, you've already anticipated because you know the interests and modes of engagement of your partners. So, some of the questions you will want to ask yourself are, who can act on this research? So, who are you targeting? What behaviors or practices are you hoping might be impacted as a result of this research and its uptake? So, for example, if you're researching health issues, you might want to identify the people most commonly affected by those issues, or the groups of practitioners that are supporting people who are facing those issues. Or if you're talking about prevention, you want to go upstream from the issue and think about engaging with peoples who can work to prevent the future issue. So, what behaviors or practices might your research be able to have an impact for? So those are defined in knowledge mobilization terms as your primary target audiences. So the people that you most want to be able to access, understand, and mobilize the research findings that you're working to create. Another question that's really important is who is affected? So, who might be impacted by the research process itself, as well as by the implementation of the findings? Who might benefit from this research? Could anyone suffer from it? Really important question. And whose status quo might this research impact or change? So, these people, which are sometimes called stakeholders or involved parties, might have knowledge that needs to be included in the research or knowledge mobilization process as crucial parts of the broader puzzle that is this issue. You also want to ask yourself who can influence the research or its expected impact. So, who are your champions or key mobilizers of knowledge and practice? Who will help to support and promote your knowledge mobilization efforts? Maybe people hold a network that you're not quite part of, but they can, through their network, they can spread your research findings further than you could by yourself. Who are your key decision makers on the issue? Are they research funders? Are they policymakers? Who might be opposed to this project and work against its implementation? Kind of a strange thing to ask, but often change, when we're trying to create change or to impact the understanding in a sector, it can be very difficult because there are the ways we do things and there are the ways that power flows. And sometimes we need to think about what might we be changing, or what kind of challenges might we be facing. And so the people who can influence the research and its impact are called influencers. So influence can take part, as I've already suggested, through organizational and governmental policy. It can also occur through social pressure, social norms, and change. You can think, for example, about public service announcements. Like I'm old enough to remember when there would be these little 30 to 60-second long advertisements, often sponsored by government bodies or health bodies, that would come on and just inform you about the importance of daily physical activity, for example, or the dangers of smoking or of drug use. Those aren't actually legalistic changes to public behavior, but they were hugely impactful as social kind of forces. And so, just one last note, as you're identifying your research collaborators and knowledge mobilization audiences, consider to yourself what gaps exist in already actively engaged parties to your work. So pay attention to who has spoken on this issue already, whose voices may be being heard, and whose voices, crucially, are either not heard or are being ignored. Whether some perspectives may not be represented but should be, and then think about how you might be able to reach out to these particular people with intention. Um, so, for example, Ceci and a group of campus collaborators several years ago now led a research project on food insecurity among university students. So, as well as surveying the student body in general, we specifically reached out and worked with groups of racialized students, specifically because we wanted to reach and elevate the voices of racialized students who are disproportionately impacted by food insecurity, but not usually mainstreamed or centered as experts on the subject. So it's helpful to think about who are the kind of key centralized main voices, and then what voices are not being given um, the respect and attention that they need to have in order for us to actually have impact and meaningfully learn together. So on our next slide, you can see that depending on the context, anyone can be a research collaborator and anyone can be a research user. So we've listed some examples of broad audience groups here. Um, so you can see I won't read out the whole slide, and in fact they overlap really nicely with the communities that you've already identified as of importance to you. So we have international development agencies, people with lived experience and expertise, the quote unquote general public, so the public at large. We got nonprofit organizations, we've got community associations, we've got activists, artists, and elders. Very broadly speaking, these are just some of the many, many groups of people that we can engage with as audience groups and collaborators and knowledge holders and users. So ideally, as you develop a project, of course, you will become increasingly specific about who you're hoping to reach and engage. So for example, if you're hoping to work with NGOs, think about their location and sectors. If you want to work with government, think about the level of government, which department, which types of roles in those departments. And then again, when you're considering impact or outreach to the broadly defined general public, think about where people live and work, their ages, their genders, their various markers of identity, their education, and so on. And this will help you to be a lot more specific and intentional about planning your knowledge mobilization outreach. As I've already said, go beyond the usual suspects and think really hard about who's not at the table, whose voices are not being considered or invited in as users and holders of knowledge, who's representing your community of interest, who's most affected. Often those who are not at the table are not the same as those who are most affected. So, for example, um, service providers may often serve as representatives of people with a shared commonality or issue, but they often don't have lived or living experience of the issue that they are serving. So think really hard about who it is you need to reach and why. And the more you think about it, the clearer it will become what a good team is. So finally, one last piece of advice, learn the history of partnerships between your institution and a given community partner. This is before reaching out. So often, often communities find themselves over-researched but under-supported. So look out for research fatigue. I sit on the board of a nonprofit, and we receive very, very, very frequent kind of cold calls and email asking if a student can do their research with us or if a researcher can study a such and such. And we love the idea, but we're exhausted and we're just trying to run our organization. So try to be aware of who's already engaged, how it went, were there impacts that need to be addressed or rectified. Um, don't duplicate existing research and partnerships unless you intentionally are doing so. Before you engage with the community or invite them in, look at what is already known, like what already is known on an issue, what's in the local report, news, social media, etc. Um, a little note to think about citation politics. So it's really interesting and important if we're trying to think very broadly and collaboratively in terms of research creation and knowledge mobilization. Be conscious of the key terms, issues, and areas that you're foregrounding in your research. You can also, even your literature review and your approach to the research can also be informed by critical community engagement values. So, for example, you may choose to highlight voices that are not as often cited as dominant ones. You can value gray or non-peer-reviewed literature and podcasts and so on. Opening your project and your thinking conceptually to voices that aren't always included makes it stronger rather than making it less rigorous because you're including more forms of knowledge and expertise, and you're also crucially expanding the reach of your work through the same steps. I think I'm good with that slide, Kendra. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Liz. So we were hoping that we might be able to take a brief break from hearing us talk, and give you all the opportunity to try it out and to think about some collaborators and ways of working. So this is a made-up research project. It's something we've conceptualized to still be in its early stages. So we're hoping we can go through together to identify some potential collaborators that we might want to engage in the research. So for the purposes of our conversation today, the research interests would be around food insecurity, access to nutritious and healthy food for food insecure populations, and local food production. Um, the context here is that food security affects roughly 13% of households in the city of Guelph and is linked to poorer physical and mental health among adults. And the tentative research questions that we've provided are around what are the key barriers to accessing nutritious food for households in Guelph, and what models might be implemented to address food insecurity in Guelph. So try to hold those research questions around barriers and models to accessing nutritious foods in Guelph. Hold those in your brain. And I will go over to the next slide here. Thanks, Liz. That's great. Liz has just put those tentative research questions in the chat. So here, I'm hoping that folks can use the annotation tool to write ideas of collaborators directly onto the slide. So if you go down in Zoom, you should have the option to select annotate in your kind of bar at the bottom and be able to write directly on the slide. Or you're welcome to pop things into the chat as well.
Are people able to find the annotation tool?
I see some annotating
Okay.
happening.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
I can see a little bit, but if folks have ideas, if it's easier just to pop it into the chat, I'm happy to add things as well as they pop up. So one of the service providers and organizations is, yep, we've got food banks, absolutely.
Registered dietitians at local public health units and at
Mm-hmm.
Guelph Community Health Center. Fabulous.
Add that in. Maybe some framing questions that might help is to think about who might be affected or impacted by the issue of food insecurity in Guelph and who might be able to influence
Yeah.
food
Yeah. So
insecurity in Guelph.
exactly. Going through our knowledge mobilization thinking, who might be good collaborators,
Hmm.
who's affected by the issue, who has knowledge of the issue, who might be able to impact the ways in which these things are addressed. Just repeating what you said, Kendra, because it was a helpful trigger. So
Yeah,
thinking
thanks,
about it
Liz.
from those perspectives, who holds
Mm.
understanding, who holds knowledge of what are the key barriers to accessing nutritious food in Guelph, and who holds knowledge about what models could be implemented to address it. Awesome. I see people are writing away.
Mm.
That's fabulous.
Grocery stores and food processors and also food producers. Yep, absolutely. That's great. That's on my list as well.
I think I might, unsurprisingly to you, Kendra,
Hmm.
as an engaged scholar, I would want to put, oh, someone might be right there under general or interested public. I would really want to identify some members of households that are experiencing food insecurity and learn
Hmm.
directly from them. Yep, there we are. So we've got people with lived experience with food
Yep, that
insecurity.
was going to be my suggestion too.
Because often by engaging early with people who see the issue and live the issue, we can learn where they see the kind of tension points or the cracks
Hmm.
in the system, and that will help us to identify other potential collaborators that we might not have thought of. So that's a great one.
I'm also thinking about like neighborhood groups potentially. So groups that individuals who might be experiencing food insecurity might be interacting with regularly, and might who would maybe have a sense of food insecurity in their particular kind of neighborhood areas.
Yeah.
Um,
Schools can be really fabulous partners for many issues because many schools, including in Guelph Wellington, have programs that will send little backpacks of food and or grocery gift cards home with children who are identified as experiencing poverty and or food insecurity.
mhm. Also, one more that I haven't seen come up is the city of Guelph. um, because their policy impacts many of these service providers as well. Um, and they may have particular policies that could be directly
Yeah,
affecting folks who are experiencing food insecurity. I see settlement and refugee organizations, absolutely. They would definitely be dialed into their community, and kind of whether food insecurity is an issue
yeah.
or a question for them.
I
Um,
don't know if Jack is still on the call, but they commented earlier that in terms of the communities they'd like to collaborate with, that it would include government, community food workers, and then students and learners who are the future of food. I think that's an intriguing comment.
mhm.
to think about what do people who are studying and learning about any key issue know about it, or what light might they be able to shed on a gnarly problem.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Could maybe put them like somewhere in between, maybe here.
Are we missing any players that people are thinking should be a part of our potential collaborators on this project about barriers to accessing nutritious food and possible models to address food insecurity? I'm thinking it might be helpful because I just reminded us all to do our homework first. Oh, look, another comment, homeless shelters.
Homeless
Excellent.
shelters.
Yeah,
Yep.
a lot of frontline food provision happens through shelters. That's a great idea. I was just going to say, because we want to do our homework before we reach out, I think it would be a really good idea, particularly on the second research question, to do a little bit of looking at ways in which other areas, other municipalities or areas
Hmm.
have chosen to try to address food insecurity, community farms, food shares, models of service provision, etc. Media, great idea.
Hmm.
So if you're comfortable speaking, I'd love to hear what you mean specifically we could do with media. Do you mean reach out as a tool to disseminate knowledge, or do you mean turn to media to learn more about the existing issues?
I mean media in the sense of like there are food shows which are quite powerful.
Right.
Could
Hmm.
bring in the idea of using media as a tool, um, depending on the research. I mean, that tool could be communicated in many different formats, but media is a very powerful tool, be it either if it's a local celebrity or there are versions, but just in general, having someone from the media industry
Fabulous.
involved, if that makes
Absolutely.
sense.
It totally
Yeah,
makes sense. Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah. It makes great sense. And you're kind of you're moving us forward actually in terms of like strategies of dissemination. So there's the collaboration that shapes the project. And I think you're pushing us in a really fruitful direction to like how do we get eyes on an issue? How do we create awareness and interest? And using local media or higher level media is an excellent way to kind of drive attention and change as well. Thank you for that.
Yes. All right, that's wonderful. Thanks for participating, everybody. I think we got most of the potential collaborators that were on my list. So really, this exercise is here. And we encourage you to think through kind of a similar exercise of who would you want to engage, who can you potentially engage in your project, to do this exercise with your own research project or questions that you're tackling. And some tips from us on if you're struggling to identify the right collaborators, you can do things like read gray literature that's related to the issue that you're interested in, see who the authors are, see who the contributors are. And just learn some more. You can, of course, read research reports, news articles, opinion pieces, blogs. So thinking again, who's writing them, who's mentioned in these pieces. You can follow key figures in the issue. Well, kind of once you've identified those people, you can follow them on social media, attend events, either virtually or in person. And another suggestion that we often have for folks working on campus is to connect with brokers. So maybe a faculty advisor who works in that area, or if you have colleagues who are working in that area, or even with SESI staff or other knowledge brokers on campus, we can potentially work to help facilitate some of those relationships and those collaborative conversations.
Do you believe we're back to me, are we?
I believe, oh, hang on, I'm gonna have to get rid of, can everyone still see the annotations? Oops.
Yep,
Okay, I'm gonna get rid of those. Hang on one moment.
no problem.
There we go. All right, Liz, all that's over to you. But I will bring these up for you.
So now we're just going to continue our discussion of meaningful engagement for impact. So I've said some of this stuff before. I'm going to repeat myself. If your goal is meaningful engagement, it's really important to get a better understanding of your collaborators or potential collaborators and knowledge users' contexts before you reach out to them. This, as I said, partly because people are often experiencing overwork and research fatigue, but also because it helps you to much better understand and articulate to them how your particular research project or potential collaboration may relate to those ongoing existing priorities and actions that they're already engaged in, and where there may be opportunities, therefore, for you to come together with some shared intentions and commitments. So, in other words, do your homework before you come to the table. That doesn't mean you have to know everything and you can't make mistakes. It's totally amazing to go to people with curiosity and with an offer. Just do your best to respect their time by already knowing what are the key issues in some of the ways Kendra was just talking about, what their priorities are. If you can figure out their mode of working, that's really helpful. Some sense of their kind of organizational culture. That just makes it a little easier for you to make meaningful and feasible invitations. So successful engagement doesn't only require that you think of the best ways to integrate people into your research process, but it also means you have to think about how the research may fit into their realities. Because again, to generate impact, we become part of a broader world. We don't just tweet out into it, ideally speaking. So questions you might want to think about before you reach out could be, what are your potential partners' contexts and goals? What key issues are they interested in, and what conversations are already happening? What topics are ripe for research and action, either because of particular funding calls, dedicated funding, policy windows, community momentum, etc. And again, just monitoring social media, talking with the people that are linked to these fields. Those kinds of practices go a long way to help you understand what's a live issue, where are appetites, and how can I therefore frame my outreach. Another question that's really important is, how do your own research interests relate to those contexts, right? So what's the context that I'm working in? How might my research interests, aptitudes, abilities, positionality be of relevance, and collaborate meaningfully? How can you build on work that's already being done? And how will your research contribute to the desired change that you and your potential collaborators are working towards? Um, and sometimes people say, we're not all working for change, but I think all learning and research and knowledge mobilization and creation is change-making work. It doesn't mean that every time you do an experiment, you end up building a new product, right? Or every time we research a social issue, we fix a policy for it. What it does mean is that every time learning is done and research is shared into the world, the way that people perceive that issue, the way they perceive the subject changes as a result. And therefore, it's very helpful and important to be very intentional with building networks and constellations of relationships so that as research is shared, generated, and then implemented potentially, we're doing it in a coherent, collaborative manner with all the right sets of eyes on it so that we minimize potential harm and maximize potential positive impact. So we've talked about the desired change. What can you bring to the table? This is a really important part, and it's often difficult for people like me and Kendra who get very excited about collaborative research. It's very important to be very realistic and humble almost about what we realistically can bring to a topic or to a collaboration, how we can engage and not to overpromise. I think a lot of us who choose to be academic researchers in various ways, we're very passionate about the subjects that we've studied, and we're very passionate about sharing that knowledge out into the world. Um, we're not always as highly resourced or well situated as we would like to be to do massive things. So there's a great deal of respect for collaborators and being very honest about the limitations of our capacities and where our strengths best lie. So please do feel free to do that. And also, a good practice in engagement is to be flexible and responsive. Do a lot of listening, and if possible, wherever possible, leave space for the research and action goals to change along with the learning that occurs. So, doing your homework and reflecting on these questions I've walked through will help you to be a better partner and ensure that the benefits of your potential collaborations are mutual, if not the same, for all involved parties. So, we want everyone in a collaboration to be enriched by it, whether because there's new learning, whether because they have a new tool to lobby for policy change, whether because they have a new network of contacts who are interested in a shared set of issues or topics. You might need to do quite a bit of of searching to be able to understand potential collaborators' realities and context. So just do a lot of learning. Go with curiosity. Curiosity. That's how we've been trained, right? We're professional question askers. So ask the same questions you would of your potential collaborators and communities of knowledge holders and users as you would of the problem itself that you're addressing. Are you happy to go to the next slide, Kendra? And then once you've identified and potentially had some chats with your potential collaborators, knowledge holders, and users, you're going to want to start thinking with them about how and when those partners might be best able to take part in and to contribute to the research and knowledge mobilization process. So I love me a good circular diagram here. So this is a visual of the sort of research cycle, right? So they can join us at any and all phases of this research cycle. So we were just talking about identifying and connecting with end users, which is sort of at the topish left around 10 o'clock, let's say. And then together at or in consultation with their realities, you're going to develop your research topic and your plan. You're going to conduct your research. You're going to interpret and communicate your results. You're going to evaluate your impact. And then round and round we go again and again. So this is like the integrated knowledge mobilization cycle. At any and all points of this cycle, any of these points in the cycle is a great opportunity for you to connect with the neighborhood group or the policy analysts or the scientists at another university or whoever your key communities are, the farmers, um, and say, can I get a gut check on this? Or would you review these dissemination tools I'm thinking of making? Or can you tell me what kind of language works best with your clients? Whatever kind of insights you need. What do these research questions make sense to you? Would this answer the question that you're holding? So in a traditional research model, researchers typically would shape their research based on their own knowledge, understanding, expertise, and vision. And then at the end, sort of be like, oh, hey, let's disseminate what we learned. So that's called end of project knowledge mobilization. It works very well in some contexts and very poorly in others. In an integrated model, we know from research that integrating engagement throughout the research cycle leads to the creation of more relevant knowledge, first of all, as well as increasing the uptake and impact of research findings. Because in the most basic sense, you've kind of created the research and the users and the audience together kind of simultaneously. So you know you're building research that is wanted and needed because you've been in dialogue with those who want and need and are poised to use it. So we do know that integrated knowledge mobilization tends to lead to broader dissemination and crucially more deep research impact in most cases. So as early as possible, you would meet with your collaborators once they've consented, right? You meet together, you have key conversations to frame the research question and to develop your research plans. This can increase the relevance of the research by making sure that it builds on your partner's questions and priorities. So it's answering questions that are held broadly, not just by you. Um, at CESI, most of our research engagement starts with this kind of a process. So, for example, in the research shop, which Kendra oversees, partners are the ones that reach out to Kendra or others of us initiating a project by approaching us with a research question or priority that they would like our support and collaboration to explore. So in our model, the research is built based on community identified priorities. That's not the case in every department or program across campus, and it needn't be for these principles to still be very fruitful in implementation. So partners, as I've said, can also be involved as the research is conducted. They can sometimes serve as active co-researchers, or they can receive regular updates and have opportunity to review at key steps. So, for example, you've created your survey tool or your kind of key questions, and you just want to make sure that with your community collaborators and ultimate knowledge users, these questions make sense to them, right? So they can do check-ins, they can be sitting there the whole time. They can also, as Kendra mentioned earlier, they can be excellent brokers as we try to reach out and recruit research participants, other collaborators, and then crucially to disseminate the work of the project. Just want to make a quick note. Involving members of the public or community members as research participants is not the same thing as engagement. So in community engaged models, not only are community members sources of data, but they have a say in the research process and decision making. So you value their opinions not only as data for the project, but as part of the project process formation and decision making. And then here we are coming to the final stage, which is one of my favorite to kind of engage people in is when we're doing the actual analysis and interpretation of results. So of course, it will vary by discipline to what extent it's appropriate to involve your collaborators and stakeholders at this phase of the research. But if your partners you've identified because they have tremendous practical knowledge and expertise on the issue or subject you're studying, they're also great people to bring in when you're trying to make sense of some of your surprising results or some confusing long form responses, or if you're just trying to theme your results, or you don't understand a set of data you've got, call in your collaborators. They can be amazing brains to have there. And then, of course, they're also well placed to help determine how to share your findings and to reach other collaborators and audiences and implement them into policy or practice. So they can do outreach to other audience groups. They can shake their networks of which you're not a part. They can inform decisions on the types of dissemination activities to use. So to very effectively disseminate knowledge, of course, you don't necessarily assume that everyone wants to read a peer-reviewed article or a set of tweets, for example. Some people like interactive exhibits. Some people like social media um, posts. Some people need a presentation to their board of directors. So by working with people, they can help you figure out what will be the most effective way to share your knowledge. And then at end of project, this is another really great time to involve people, of course. Your collaborators are in a really good position to observe and assess the impacts of the project at ground level in terms of people's policies, practices, and also to let you know about any barriers to implementation of the findings and offer insights into how to keep the work moving forward in the world. So I hope I've sold you on this. Engagement throughout the research process can really make research more relevant, more applied, more shared, and more impactful. And the collaborators involved throughout a research process are much more likely to use and implement the findings themselves, which can help lead to greater research impact. Take a breath because I just put a lot out there. Does anyone have questions or comments on this kind of uh, integrated KMB model? Seeing none. Do you mind going to the next slide, Kendra? Thanks. So we're going to shift gears a little bit and think about what engagement can and might look like in practice. So another one of our beautiful, I think we're going to be known for our diagrams, Kendra. So this is a diagram sort of explaining the different levels of engagement that can occur within or across a project. So, and there's no right or wrong level. It all really needs to be tailored to your particular issue, context, collaborators, and goals, really. So, um, impact grows the further to the right you move along this spectrum of engagement. And I'm just going to read out the center, so I'm reading from least engaged to most engaged, the way we describe these. Uh, collaborators can inform the project, they can consult on the project, they can be involved in a project, they can collaborate on a project, or they can share leadership of a project. And as we go from inform along the spectrum to joint leadership, of course, our impact becomes stronger. Our impact potential grows because there is more unified collaborative process. Similarly, the downside, arguably, is that the further we go to the right of that spectrum to joint leadership collaboration, we also we have less control over the direction of the project, and the process inevitably becomes slower. So you may find on consideration that for your project and timelines for many reasons, community partner timelines, your own requirements, you want or need to sit further toward the inform and consult end of the thing than the shared leadership end of the thing. It all really will go project to project. So these are the increasing levels of stakeholder or collaborator engagement and control on a research project. And of course, as we increase the level of engagement in a project, we increase its potential impact while also needing to let go of sort of the steering wheel a little bit. So I just want to go a little more slowly through these levels of engagement with you. So in in a project where collaborators inform the project, this could look like researchers leading the project independently from their community collaborators or informants, and then later sharing back their key findings, for example, about best practices in child nutrition or create an infographic to be distributed. So I do my research and I inform you about it. Let's say I'm the academic. If I'm a researcher who's going to consult instead with community and collaborators, I'm going to check in with you, gather feedback on a range of possible options for the outputs that I'm going to create. So I might say, oh, we studied child nutrition. We're making examples of healthy meal recipes. Would you prefer us to make up for you a recipe book or some kind of interactive instructional workshop where you can cook by yourself? So you might form, for example, an advisory council of community members and pertinent practitioners and just ask them to work together to make the decisions and be part of the process. In the middle, where we're involving our collaborators, that's where people get more involved in those ways that I was just describing, advisory councils, informing decision making. Everyone's ideas are considered. And then as we move to the right of the spectrum, collaborate and shared leadership, we're really more empowering collaborators as research partners rather than participants or people who learn from research. So we're working together. We all lead the research. The research is ours, not mine. And the researchers often are more like facilitators of a process than drivers of the process. So something we often do at SESI, for particularly for more complex, gnarly projects, is we create a research advisory team or a research leadership team that would be composed of me or Kendra or both of us, perhaps a faculty co-investigator, and then a number of people perhaps who are um, service delivery staff or executive directors from key organizations, whoever ends up being our kind of community experts. And then together we decide, are we doing a survey? Are we doing focus groups? What are our questions going to be? What do the tools look like? How's the process done? And again, like I said at the beginning, this makes it a lot slower, and it means that Kendra and I aren't we're the PIs for research ethics purposes, but we're not the ones driving the bus by ourselves. It's um, a shared initiative. So I will also say that even though it's slower and more messy often, it also leads to projects that everyone feels a huge sense of uh, affinity for, pride in, ownership of, and the dissemination just almost happens by itself because everyone has a stake in what's happening. Everyone's waiting to see what we learn together, and they've been talking us up to their collaborators. So the end of project dissemination almost happens by itself at that point because we've all been a team from the beginning. So that's kind of the spectrum of levels of involvement that you may choose and that may be right for your work in terms of involving knowledge users, stakeholders, policymakers, and so on. And as you're thinking about planning your own research and the impacts that you're seeking to create, which obviously is on your mind because you're here, you may want to think about how roles and levels of engagement may need to vary for different members of your collaborations and your audiences. Think about and ask about their own preferences, their capacity, the level of influence they can and want to have over the research and its impact. And again, I can't say it enough. There's no right or wrong way to do this when we're engaged in um, considerate, respectful conversations and we find our shared goals. It's not right to only inform and it's not right to only share leadership. It really will be a process with your collaborators and knowledge users of figuring out what is the right thing for us right now. What are my funding restrictions and deadlines? How much energy do you have? Are you waged to do this work or is this off the side of your desk? What are your preferences in terms of language or how often I'm calling you with a question? And by giving the gift of inviting someone in as part of a process, you can also create a process that is mutually effective and ideally joyful. But it does definitely, it's important to know that not all potential stakeholders, collaborators, and knowledge users are going to want to be involved at every stage of the research cycle. So um, never making assumptions and always asking questions is your absolute kind of lodestar in terms of effective and respectful engagement. I feel like I've been talking for about 3 hours. You may be thrilled to hear at this point. I'm not going to read this whole slide to you. Again, we're going to be giving them to you later on, but we just wanted to sort of share some types of engagement activities with different kind of levels of engagement. So, we talked on the last slide about the kind of spectrum. So if you're aiming to inform people, about the research that you have already done. Some great ways to do that, some pretty typical knowledge mobilization and dissemination activities, a report, a poster, a story. Maybe you can make a presentation to some key finders. So your research has happened and you're trying to think of ways to share it. These are awesome ways to do it. And there are lots of really creative ways to do informational knowledge sharing that can be really readily taken up by a variety of knowledge users. So if you're looking to consult, so get ideas and feedback on ideas, you can have comment forums. You can ask for feedback from participants. You can hold a town hall. You can do a quick survey. You can do focus groups and just get insights from others who are affected. So these would be not data collection surveys and interviews. These would be like, I want to know how you like to receive knowledge. I want to know what kind of knowledge communication makes sense to you. If you're involving people, these could look like a participatory workshop where people discuss ideas or an open space where people themselves choose the topics they want to talk about and carry out conversations. As we move to the right of this slide toward collaborating and empowering, maybe we might do something like form an advisory committee made up of researchers and community partners, where we reflect on the issue and make joint decisions. Um, and there's also the idea of a future search conference. So, for example, there are lots of conflicting viewpoints. So the focus would be on that kind of a practice on considering what are your common goals and how can we work together in spite of our kind of different approaches to it to move toward the desired future that we do share. So the impact that we're looking for. And then if you're looking to empower, there's all sorts of fascinating ways to do this. So, for example, you can use voting to get pretty blunt and directive feedback from community partners and collaborators. They can do dot voting, rank their preferences, so they get to determine what the chosen solution is going to be. You can invite a citizen jury, so you can invite members of a stakeholder group or a public to listen to so-called expert opinions and then deliberate and make their decision about the way they want to move forward. Or you can have a group of key decision makers do a fishbowl where they kind of join together, discuss an issue. Others are sitting and listening to it, but don't contribute. They're just watching the dialogue and thus becoming more informed about how they might want to move forward. So it's important in this consideration, and again, you'll have this slide. You can flip through our slides and have a think about what might work or interest you. But it's really important to think about um, choosing activities based on the level of engagement that would support your objectives as well as the expectations and desires of your collaborators, and also think about the type and amount of information that you need. Think about how many people you're trying to reach. What are the people you're trying to reach like? What are their characteristics? Are you doing in-person or online activities? What are their accessibility needs? Is there a requirement for confidentiality? What kind of imbalances or difference exist in terms of power identities in the space? Um, are there any challenges to communication, language barriers, or others? And what time and resources are available? So, thinking really fulsomely in advance of any kind of engagement activity will really enable you to shape it in a way that it's an enabling experience for your desired collaborators. I'm good with that. Thank you.
All right. So I think we are almost through, and we'll have some time for questions if anybody has questions at the end. But before we go, we just wanted to offer some tips and considerations for effective engagement. Um, and some of this will be a bit of a recap. But First of all, if you aren't familiar with the community you'd like to engage with, consider using a broker who has an existing relationship and is trusted to you. So I touched on this earlier, but it could be a faculty member, a colleague, University of Guelph staff, or really anyone else that you trust to send an introductory email or set a meeting on your behalf, or at least begin that reaching out process. Um, you want to please connect with Ceci or other folks on campus to see if there's a history of working with the University of Guelph. Like if you're hoping to engage with a particular community, we really want to make sure that we are not overburdening particular communities who may feel over-researched, as Liz mentioned. Um, It can be really helpful too to know whether there's a history of working with the university, and what that history looks like, because it may not always be a good fit. They may have had negative experiences previously that might impact any conversations that you go to have. Um, so good to get a sense of what's happened historically before you move forward. Um, Also, leave lots of lead time. Community engagement is notoriously resource intensive, and community partners are almost always under-resourced and overtaxed. So they have very busy schedules to work around, and booking meetings and finding time to connect can be challenging, either for those initial meetings or um, if you have particular like touch points that you've built a research plan or a dissemination plan, and you want to have very particular timely check-ins, it's important to build those in well in advance so that you can ensure that all of your key folks can be present. You should expect to have multiple conversations. This will, of course, be dependent on the level of engagement that you are planning throughout your project, but ideally, you'll be engaging throughout the research process, and you want to ensure that there's ample opportunities for conversation, for setting shared goals, to address questions, to set priorities, and really to cover anything that might come up. Where applicable and within your comfort levels, you should discuss any personal connections that you have to your communities and your topics of interest. Um, we really do recommend wherever possible just to connect on a human, personal level. It goes a long way to building trust and relationships. Um, and also graciously accept if they're not interested. Um, Not all projects are going to be the right fit or the right timing. And unfortunately, there's, when if a collaborator isn't interested in pursuing that collaboration, um, that is kind of where things have to end. You may have to pivot. So we also acknowledge that engaging with new stakeholders most often takes place online via email. So we've just provided a sample email template that may be helpful. I'm not going to read through the entire thing here, but in our experience, it's helpful to include the following information just so your community partners can get a feel for you, for your project, and whether they'd be interested in collaborating with you. So you want to include your basic information about who you are. Um, Also, you may want to go a little bit beyond this. If you don't have a broker introducing you, you may want to share a little bit about how you found out about their work, about their organization. Who do you know that they know? Why are you reaching out to them specifically? What about their work do you admire? So, just kind of that goes a long way to build that personal connection and trust, and you may be more likely to at least get a response back. You also want to include how your own interests relate to their context. So, how do you want to build on work that's been done, and kind of where do you fit in that landscape of work that's been done already? You may also want to share how you came to know about their work. So, provide again some context on how you got their contact information if you haven't already done that. Um, Again, this really helps to make it feel a little bit less like a cold call. And what's in it for them? What do you bring to the table? Why do you want to collaborate with them? Through which program structures are you hoping to engage? And what are the terms of this engagement? So, what are the timelines? What is the commitment that you're ideally hoping for from them? How many hours? What are the deliverables? What are the activities? Is it research? Is it a practicum? Is it service learning? Is it volunteering? So again, just getting a sense of what you're hoping to achieve, and how you're hoping they may be willing to participate. Um, and then also including a clear invitation to meet, just so that the email actually, like, it feels like it's going somewhere and that there's inviting a response back. So again, we'll share our slides. You're welcome to take this and tweak it to your needs, but hopefully it helps you kind of frame any future communications that you might be doing. And then, so I also, before we part ways, just want to leave with some do's and don'ts. So we really hope we've illustrated that community engagement is a dynamic process. It requires reflection and adaptation throughout. So um, some of the things, these are kind of some nuggets of wisdom from our own experience working on many community engaged projects. So things to do, ensure all of your key collaborators are at the table early in the process. Set clear, feasible goals that link knowledge to action. Get to know your collaborators as human. And on that note, collaborate with compassion. Recognize that, many folks on campus, off campus, we're all balancing many priorities. This project may be your number one priority, but it may not be the case for all of your collaborators, especially, as I mentioned, community partners who are often underfunded. So really leave room for flexibility, leave room to learn and to pivot and change. Um, and this will help you create something that is as impactful and enjoyable, like to have the process be enjoyable by everyone as well. Um, and on the don't side, it's a little bit shorter, but please don't cold call your potential collaborators without doing your homework. Don't get lost in someone's inbox or make them feel like you're wasting their time. Really think about that mutual benefit. So what can you both bring to the project and what will that collaboration then be able to accomplish? Also, on kind of the flip side, don't approach collaborators with a fully formed project idea with absolutely no room for input, especially if kind of on that scale of engagement you're hoping to fall kind of somewhere in the middle or to the right. Um, and also, don't ask collaborators to plan your project for you. So again, this is meant to be a collaborative process. Um, there's a fine line between kind of allowing or asking community partners to co-create or have strong input on a project, um, and actually overtaxing them. So again, really just have those conversations, know where everyone's levels of comfort and desire are, and be willing to be flexible and make changes throughout.
Fabulous. Thank you, Kendra. And just
Yeah.
this is our last slide of content. And really, we always like to take a pause and just come back to kind of our guiding principles and practices because I think these can be really helpful. Just quick guides to a process as you're working in collaboration or trying to communicate clearly and all these things. So a few things that we know to be true. Um, Trust takes time and requires relationships. So invest your time and energies in developing relationships. Get to know your partners, as Kendra was saying. Understand them as human beings, if and as they're willing to share their personal lives, but also understand to leave time in your meetings for informal things. So at SESI, we often just structure breaks in, or we'll have like a table with snacks and coffee and tea on it. So we're not saying it's chat time, but because everyone's coming in and gathering their drinks, you can say, "Gosh, it was snowy," or "I saw you at the market last Saturday," or "I love your pants," or whatever like small things help to open and create a sense of warmth. Food and drink are excellent things. In a virtual environment, it might just be opening the call a little bit early and asking people how they're doing, but make the investment in relationships with people and organizations rather than only with potential collaborators, if that makes sense. So don't go into every conversation wanting something or with a goal. Respect people's presence. Collaborate with compassion. Everyone is busy. As Kendra was saying earlier, like juggling and changing as we go is the most normal human thing to do in the world. So setting a clear plan with responsibilities, limitations, and so on, and then giving room for people to create ongoing connections so that we can check in, revisit. This links a lot to the idea of reciprocity. So I said this earlier, set clear and feasible goals for the collaboration that kind of recognize everyone's priorities. And crucially, mutual benefit does not need to mean that we're all getting the same thing out of a collaboration. So I, as a researcher, might be learning about an issue that I've been passionate about, and I might then go on to publish a journal article or speak at a conference. That might be what really lights me up. And then my collaborator might be really lit up by having some, U of G stamped research data to bring to their board of directors or to their boss or to their groups of colleagues to kind of say, look, the thing we thought was true has been demonstrated by research. Let's lobby for change. So we don't need to all get the same thing out of things. Oftentimes, people with lived experience and expertise, what they get from these collaborations is feeling heard as experts in their own lives and in their own deep knowledges. So the needs are always different. And food, I've already said, food really helps. So we're all looking for different things, but make sure everyone is getting something out of it. Otherwise, the collaboration is more like a passion for one person and an obligation for another. So as much as possible, we want to know each other, know each other's cultural context, organizational context. Just make sure that everyone's getting something. Um, One great way to honor this is to create clear and accessible outputs that are useful and contribute to action for all collaborators, So valuing and pursuing both scientific and informal outputs, and societal impacts as well as research impacts. And then just remembering that what we all need and want might evolve over time. So that's why the communication and the relationships and the trusting exchange have to stay crucial. I talked briefly about power a little earlier on. Just want to circle back to the real importance when we're doing collaborative work, to be mindful of and to acknowledge existing inequities, and identify strategies within your research process and your team functions, to address those. Be aware of the power dynamics between academic institutions and communities, as well as within communities and within institutions. So who holds funding and resources? Whose space are we meeting on? Whose voice is typically, held above the other voices at the table? Let's build in actual practices to ensure that airtime is shared, for example. Decision making is democratic, or whatever model you choose, these kinds of things. Where relevant and possible, provide incentives for participation, both by your collaborators, if they're not waged to do this work, and by your research participants as well. So we often will try to work into a project budget honoraria for unwaged or people who aren't doing this work as part of their occupation for their participation in a research team, advisory team, for example. And then educate yourselves and try to implement anti-oppressive research practices. So we offer a small training on anti-oppressive practices in research and teaching, and it can be really helpful for people to just, if you're trying to engage meaningfully and collaborate well, but you just don't know exactly how to start, it's really helpful to have a grounding in a set of kind of practices, principles, and frameworks so that you can build systems that enable participation rather than making it feel risky. And finally, knowledge, which is what we're here to talk about today. It's really important to acknowledge, as we've kind of mentioned a few times, knowledge and wisdom don't always look the same. So in academia, I think we're more used to explicit knowledge that is written based on demonstrable facts. And that kind of knowledge is valued and seen as worthy. It's important to pay attention as researchers to the other ways in which knowledge can be expressed. For example, tacit knowledge that's based in lived experience or practice. Some kinds of knowledges are best shared in story and intuition and insight rather than in like a documented data-based observation. That doesn't make it less than, it makes it different than. Adopting asset-based approaches to community and collaborating with respect for community and cultural knowledge is crucial. So pay attention to what questions you ask, how you approach the research and collaboration. For example, at CESI, we don't talk about community-engaged research as addressing community research needs. That's kind of the conventional language. We say research priorities because actually saying need implies that there's a gap out in community and we're going to, benevolently fill it. But actually, the fact is that there are priorities, actions, expertise, energies, knowledges, and insights in community, just there as there are in academia. So by collaborating from a place of strength, you reframe the ways in which you value one another's participation. So finally, last tip, tailor both your research design and your knowledge mobilization activities to the local context and the context of your partners and collaborators to ensure that the knowledge is relevant and applicable for your partners. So really, if we were to sum up this presentation in a sentence, it might be something like research impact comes through effective relationship building. Um, there are many, many steps to the integrated knowledge mobilization process, and we've sketched through a lot of those above. But I think maybe the most important thing I'd love to leave you with is that, people are social animals. N Research is a social wealth. Yeah, I mean, it's a shared resource, and so working in collaboration, sharing your research findings with others in whatever way, all around the research cycle across the spectrum makes sense to you, is a profoundly human act, and it will build deeper reach and impact for your research. Last words over to Kendra.
They are not long words, all to say. I think we have a little bit of time. If anybody has questions, we're happy to tackle those now. We also invite you to get in touch with us at any point. You can find our website, you can reach out via email. And there's also, just when the slide deck goes out, any sort of, like, we've provided a list of references, and there's also some appendices and things that may be helpful for folks. So if when you get those and you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. But yeah, otherwise we are here for folks if they have anything they'd like to discuss. If anyone has questions, you're also welcome to unmute and say them out loud if you'd like, if you'd like.
Carly says thank you. You're welcome.
Yeah, you are
Get
most
in touch
welcome.
with us if ever you want to talk knowledge
Hmm.
mobilization and engagement. There are some of our favorite things to talk about. Okay.
Well,
Michelle, did you want the last word to kind of maybe close out the session and tease the next one? Perhaps not. Oh, there you are.
I was just trying to find the right button. Yeah, I'm happy to pop the link to the next session in the chat if anyone's interested in registering. I believe the next one is the knowledge mobilization, KTT strategies, and dissemination with Elizabeth Shantz from the Aero Food Institute. I'll
Sure to
pop
be
the full
amazing.
link to the schedule in the chat for anyone who's still here and interested.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle.